That's Aryna, that's crazy. That was my moment, that was so much fun. You know what, it's so funny. Actually, the Rome crowd always picks its favorite, and this year they chose Alex even before the Italian Open had officially started. The tournament organizers could sense the momentum building around her. Schedules and center court plans were quietly adjusted for the fearless 19-year-old Filipino wild card. She had just stunned the tennis world in Miami by defeating three Grand Slam champions, a historic achievement no player ranked so low had ever accomplished in WTA history. And yes, Aryna Sabalenka noticed. How could she not? She arrived in Rome as the world's #1 seed, riding a dominant 9-match WTA 1000 winning streak. She had just completed the Sunshine Double and defeated Coco Gauff in the Miami final. By every standard, this was supposed to be her tournament, her spotlight, her moment. Nobody questioned the Queen's dominance, at least not publicly, but Rome had already fallen under Alex's spell. Then came the quarterfinal that changed the entire atmosphere of the tournament. A shocking first-ever loss for Sabalenka to Zhang Qinwen. Tension rose from every corner of Foro Italico. A fan shouted from the stands, and Sabalenka's composure began to crack under the pressure. Frustration turned into an obscenity, then a code violation. While the stunned Rome crowd watched one of the sport's most powerful champions completely unravel in real time, regret followed almost instantly. "I didn't expect that, to be honest. I'm super proud, super happy, super honored," Sabalenka later admitted. Those words carried far more emotion than many realized, because what happened in Rome was bigger than one upset. It was the moment the tennis world understood that Alex was no longer just a promising young talent. She was becoming the story everyone could no longer ignore. Hit subscribe because the perspective you're about to hear is the one mainstream coverage tried to bury. What the scoreboard hid was far more interesting. And the real story didn't begin in Rome. It began 6 weeks earlier on the hard courts of Miami, where 19-year-old Filipino wildcard Alex Eala shattered every assumption the tennis world had about who truly belongs among the elite. She arrived at the 2025 Miami Open ranked world number 140, barely mentioned in mainstream predictions, and left as one of the most talked about names in global tennis. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke run fueled by collapsing opponents. Eala delivered under immense pressure against some of the biggest champions in the sport on one of the grandest stages outside the majors. First came Jelena Ostapenko, where Eala battled back after trailing 4-0 in the opening set. Then came Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion, whom she dismantled 6-4, 6-2, becoming the first Filipino player in the Open era to defeat a Grand Slam champion at tour level. And then came the breakthrough that stunned the entire tennis world, a fearless straight-sets victory over Iga Swiatek. She closed out the match after fighting back from 4-2 down in the second set. In doing so, Eala became the first wild card in WTA history to defeat three Grand Slam champions in straight sets during a single tournament run. She also became the second lowest-ranked woman ever to reach the Miami Open semifinals and the first Filipino player to break into the WTA Top 100, skyrocketing from world number 140 to number 75 almost overnight. Her magical run finally ended against Jessica Pegula in a grueling semifinal that stretched past midnight. It was a three-set battle where Eala clawed back after losing the opening set and pushed Pegula to her absolute limit. Afterwards, Pegula openly admitted how difficult the match had been, praising the teenager's composure and fearless shot-making. But the biggest takeaway wasn't just the results. Alex Eala didn't simply make a deep tournament run. She completely changed the conversation around the next generation of women's tennis. And she did it at the exact same event where Aryna Sabalenka was dominating the draw, winning the title and completing the Sunshine Double. Two women, one tournament, two completely different stories capturing the world's attention. Alex Eala may not have won the title in Miami, but she won something just as powerful: the narrative. And in modern professional sports, those two things are not always the same currency. By the time the clay season arrived, the tension between results and attention had become impossible to ignore. Eala skipped a lower-tier event in Catalonia to focus completely on the Italian Open, making it clear that Rome was not a simple learning experience for her. It was a statement opportunity. The draw only intensified the intrigue when Eala landed in Aryna Sabalenka's half of the bracket, instantly fueling speculation about a potential collision between the sport's reigning queen and its fastest-rising young star. In the days leading up to the tournament, both players even shared the same practice environment at Foro Italico, training on consecutive days with American prospect Emma Navarro. One day Navarro was rallying with Eala, the next with Sabalenka. Two players from completely different ends of the tennis hierarchy, separated by just 24 hours on the exact same court, preparing for the same battlefield. It felt symbolic, almost cinematic. But once the tournament began, reality hit hard. Marta Kostyuk completely overwhelmed Eala in the opening round, cruising to a ruthless 6-0, 6-1 victory in just over an hour. Eala failed to convert a single break point and won barely 17% of her return points, never finding rhythm, timing, or control. It was the kind of brutal clay court lesson that can happen when one player is operating at peak confidence while the other is still adapting to the surface's unforgiving demands. And what made the loss even more revealing was the level Kostyuk maintained afterward. Fresh off winning the Madrid Open title, she carried that red-hot form straight into Rome, defeating Daria Kasatkina and Leylah Fernandez before eventually facing Sabalenka in the round of 16. That match told the deeper story. Sabalenka, the world number one, riding a 9-match WTA 1000 winning streak and dominating the tour, still needed over 2 hours of intense battle to finally overcome Kostyuk 6-1, 7-6-8. Suddenly, Eala's crushing defeat looked far less embarrassing and far more understandable, because the player who dismantled her was pushing even the best player in the world to the absolute edge. That Sabalenka's battle against Marta Kostyuk revealed just how dangerous the Ukrainian had become during that stretch of the clay season. The world number one erased the first 12 breakpoints she faced before Kostyuk finally converted her 13th opportunity. Kostyuk even served for the second set at 5-3, pushing Sabalenka to the brink. Before the Belarusian fought her way back, saved a set point in the tiebreak, and finally escaped on her third match point with a perfectly timed drop shot. The same player who crushed Eala 6-0, 6-1 in just 62 minutes had nearly forced the top player in the world into a deciding set. That was the real context behind Eala's brutal Rome singles exit, a context that the lazy she got exposed narrative completely ignored. But Eala's story in Rome was far from over. She still had the doubles tournament, and suddenly everything began to shift again. Teaming up for the first time with Coco Gauff, the Eala Gauff partnership instantly looked dangerous. They opened with a commanding 6-3, 6-1 victory before following it up with another straight-sets win to reach the quarterfinals. Waiting for them, there were defending champions Jasmine Paolini and Sara Errani, two of the most experienced and battle-tested doubles specialists on clay, playing in front of a passionate home crowd entirely behind the Italians. Yet Eala and Gauff refused to back down. They stormed ahead 5-3 in the opening set and even held a 40-0 lead. Before the veterans clawed their way back with incredible composure, Eala and Gauff responded by dominating the second set to force a deciding super tiebreak. They pushed the defending champions to the absolute limit in one of the most intense doubles matches of the tournament. In the end, Paolini and Errani survived 7-5, 3-6, 10-7 after 1 hour and 39 exhausting minutes. Think about what that represented. The teenager who had been completely overwhelmed in singles during the opening days of the tournament returned 1 week later and pushed two clay court legends to the edge of elimination in a hostile stadium built to celebrate the other side. That image mattered far more than most people realized at the time, because Rome was quietly showing something important about Alex Eala, not just her talent but her resilience. She could absorb humiliation, reset mentally, and still compete fearlessly on one of the biggest stages in tennis. And that brings us to the part of the Rome story everyone witnessed but almost nobody truly understood. On the very same day Alex and Coco Gauff were pushing Jasmine Paolini and Sara Errani to the limit in an electric doubles battle, Aryna Sabalenka stepped onto Campo Central for her quarterfinal against Zheng Qinwen. And suddenly everything began to collapse. On paper, the match looked almost automatic. Zheng had never beaten Sabalenka in 6 previous meetings. Sabalenka had dominated their rivalry, including victories in the 2024 Australian Open final and the Miami quarterfinals just weeks earlier, extending the head-to-head to a brutal 6-0. But Rome had different plans. From the opening games, Zheng played with a level of confidence and precision that completely changed the atmosphere inside Foro Italico. She won an incredible 82% of her first serve points, refused to give Sabalenka any rhythm, and saved all 5 break points she faced with fearless shot-making under pressure. Sabalenka created opportunities but could not capitalize on a single one of them. The frustration slowly became visible, then it became overwhelming. Zheng closed out a stunning 6-4, 6-3 victory in just 97 minutes, her first career win over the world number one and one of the biggest statements of her season. But the scoreline was only part of the story. As the match slipped further away from Sabalenka, the tension inside the stadium exploded. During one exchange, a spectator shouted from the crowd, "Come on, Aryna, play tennis." And Sabalenka instantly turned toward the stands and screamed back at full volume, "Shut the F*** up." The reaction shocked the arena. The chair umpire immediately issued a code violation for audible obscenity without hesitation. The moment was loud, emotional, and impossible to ignore. Within hours, the clip had spread across social media and sports broadcasts worldwide. And this is where the real meaning behind the title of this video begins to matter. Because the story was never about Sabalenka directly trash-talking Eala with one quote or one comment. It was about something much bigger: the pressure, the atmosphere, the shifting energy around women's tennis, and the uncomfortable reality that a new generation was beginning to steal the spotlight even from the sport's most dominant champions. What made this story so fascinating was never a single comment or headline. It was the attitude behind everything that unfolded. It was the growing tension, the subtle frustration, and the visible discomfort that emerged when the world number one suddenly realized the spotlight was beginning to shift towards someone else. Back in Miami, members of Aryna Sabalenka's camp had reportedly expressed frustration over scheduling decisions, including matches being moved and center court plans being adjusted around Alex's exploding fan support. Tournament director James Blake openly admitted that Eala needed to be placed on the main stadium court because of her massive international following and the electric atmosphere her supporters created. In many ways, Miami had started to feel like a home tournament for the young Filipino star. And that mattered, because while Sabalenka was still the reigning champion, still the dominant force, and still the face at the top of the rankings, the tournament energy was beginning to orbit around someone else. That is not an easy thing for any superstar to watch happen in real time. It felt less like a passing media story, and more like the early signs of a changing era. A queen recognizing that another player was beginning to receive the kind of attention usually reserved for champions. Then Rome intensified everything. The quarterfinal collapse against Zheng Qinwen, the emotional outburst toward the crowd, the code violation, the visible frustration under pressure, all of it became impossible to separate from the larger narrative surrounding Sabalenka's season. And the regret that followed did not end in Italy. It carried into Roland Garros weeks later, where Sabalenka once again reached the biggest stage only to suffer another painful defeat, this time against Coco Gauff in the final. But what truly ignited controversy came after the match. In one of the most criticized press conferences of her career, Sabalenka suggested that Gauff had not won because she played extraordinary tennis, but because Sabalenka herself had made too many mistakes. She even implied that Iga Swiatek might have beaten Gauff had she reached the final instead. Then came the harshest line of all when Sabalenka described it as the worst Grand Slam final she had ever played. The backlash was immediate and global. Fans, analysts, and former players criticized the comments as dismissive and unfair to Gauff's achievement, and Coco Gauff responded with remarkable composure, calmly pushing back during her own trophy press conference by saying she completely disagreed with Sabalenka's assessment and believed she had earned the victory through her level and mental strength. Suddenly, the conversation surrounding Sabalenka was no longer centered only on her tennis. It was about how she handled pressure, how she reacted to losing, and whether the rise of younger stars around her was beginning to affect her emotionally. The weeks that followed became a public exercise in damage control, with Sabalenka repeatedly trying to clarify her comments and soften the fallout from a season where the pressure of remaining on top was becoming harder and harder to hide. She didn't just move on from the controversy, she actively tried to repair it. In the aftermath of the backlash, Sabalenka wrote a private apology to Coco Gauff, acknowledging the weight of her post-final comments. She followed it up with a public interview on Eurosport Germany where she described her behavior as completely unprofessional, admitting she had let emotions take over in the heat of the moment. She reflected openly that she needed time to step back, reassess her words, and accept responsibility for how they came across. Most importantly, she made it clear that Gauff's victory was fully deserved, and that her respect for the champion was genuine and unchanged. In the weeks leading up to Wimbledon, the tone shifted even further. The two players were later seen posting light-hearted videos together on social media, laughing, dancing, and publicly signaling that the tension had been put to rest. It was a visible reset, a deliberate closing of the chapter, even if the weight of what had happened still lingered underneath the surface. Then Wimbledon arrived, and Sabalenka once again found herself in the spotlight after a semi-final defeat. Sitting in her post-match press conference, she opened with an unexpected line. "Are you guys waiting for something? You're not going to see a Roland Garros press conference." It was delivered as a joke and the room laughed with her. But the timing, the fact she referenced it unprompted in her very first sentence, revealed something deeper. It showed how much that moment in Paris still lived in her memory, how strongly it had marked her season, and how aware she had become of the narrative surrounding her. And that brings the Rome chapter into focus, because Rome wasn't the entire story of Sabalenka's 2025. It was the beginning of the emotional thread that would follow her through the rest of the season. It was the first public crack, the first visible sign of pressure breaking through the surface, unfolding on a clay court in front of a Roman crowd. While across the same tournament, a teenager she could no longer ignore continued fighting for every point, every moment, and every inch of attention in the sport. Eala, for her part, never once engaged publicly with any of the noise surrounding the narrative. No responses, no countercomments, no emotional reaction in the media. Instead, she spoke in controlled, measured interviews about compartmentalization, staying present point by point, maintaining professionalism under pressure, and using her platform to inspire the next generation of Filipino tennis players. That silence itself became part of the contrast, because the difference between the two players in Rome was not just about results, it was about response under pressure. One left the tournament with a code violation, an emotionally charged press conference arc, and a quarterfinal exit that never matched expectations. The other left with a doubles run that exceeded expectations, and a reputation that remained intact even after a heavy 6-0, 6-1 singles defeat. On paper, the scoreboard still says Aryna Sabalenka was the superior player in Rome 2025. By ranking, by achievements, by titles, that statement holds true. But that is only one layer of the story and arguably the most limited way to interpret what actually unfolded at Foro Italico. Because the full picture is far more complex, more human, and far more revealing about both athletes. Sabalenka remains the world's best player. That is not in question, but Rome exposed something deeper. Dominance in tennis is not only measured in winners and trophies, but also in emotional control, adaptability, and composure when the environment shifts. And in that specific moment, that quarterfinal, that crowd, that pressure, she showed that even the strongest dominance has limits. Not necessarily technical ones, but psychological ones. Sometimes the real opponent is not across the net. Sometimes it is the expectation, the atmosphere, and the pressure building around you from every direction. And sometimes it is the presence of a rising player who changes the emotional temperature of a tournament without even playing in your match. A 19-year-old wild card who disrupted attention in Miami, survived setbacks in Rome, and never once reacted to the storm building around her name. What happened in Rome in May 2025, when viewed without filters, looks very different from the official scoreboard story. The tennis world always moves on quickly. Next tournament, next draw, next headline, the cycle never stops. But the moments that expose something real don't disappear just because the scoreboard resets. Players carry them, pressure carries them, and what happened in Rome didn't stay in Rome. Sabalenka carried that week into Paris. Paris followed her into Wimbledon, and the emotional weight of those matches became part of her season whether she acknowledged it or not. Meanwhile, Eala kept building in silence, climbing step by step, learning, adapting, and growing without chasing headlines, without controversy, and without ever issuing a public explanation for anything. Because one player left Rome dealing with questions about control and reaction, the other left it with momentum, experience, and a trajectory that kept rising. And that's exactly why this story matters. If you made it this far, you already know this channel isn't about recycled narratives or surface-level coverage. It's about the angles mainstream media tends to skip, the context behind the headlines, not just the headlines themselves. Hit subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. Every video is built the same way: real facts, deeper perspective, no spoon-feeding. The next one is already in motion and you don't want to miss it.